Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. Remember last time he told Ruth there was another relative who could marry her before he. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together," what? Leah. My bad.
Thank you.
Rachel and Leah.
Woo!
Rachel and Lee. No. Who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to understand that.
Oh, well, yeah, that's another topic, but...
All right. Well, let's pray, because we didn't even pray before we ate, so...
Okay, pray for me.
All right. And, yeah, okay. All right, who?
With the baby, Sarai.
Oh, okay. All right. Dear Lord, thank you for what we just read here, that you have had passed down and preserved for all this time for us. And you knew all the way back in eternity past, that we would be here reading this tonight, and help us to understand it and pull from it and help it direct our minds and attention to you. We ask you also to be with the baby and Brianna tonight, and help them have a recovery, both of them, and I know it's tough being separated. So just comfort them too, and also the family. We also ask you to heal any of us that are experiencing anything that's less than 100%, and just have mercy on us in that way. And we think of Matthew tonight, who said he wasn't feeling well. And I know Savannah's had a rough week of work, and she's feeling beat up. And for anything else that was left unspoken, we just ask you for your strength to get us through it. Amen. All right. So, we could spend a whole lot of time recapping chapter 3. But I will have last week's thing recorded soon, so you can always feel free to check that out. We are well into this story now, all the way at the last chapter. And it's clear that a marriage is about to take place, and it already really has.
Already really has.
What do you mean?
Huh?
At the end of this story. At the end of what we just read.
Oh.
But there were a few things that needed to happen before anyone could say, I do. Mainly, Boaz had to inform this other relative of Elimelech, who was Ruth's father-in-law and Naomi's husband. And he had to tell this relative of Elimelech that there was this land that could be redeemed, or think of that word redeemed here, like we almost use a coupon, right? You redeem something, like I'm going to redeem my rewards from Chick-fil-A or from whatever. It's a purchasing phrase here. And so there's this land that needs to be bought or redeemed. And there's a wife and a new mother-in-law that comes along with it. It's clear from the last chapter that Boaz intended to marry Ruth. After all, he said, I will do for you all that you ask. I will redeem you. That was his intention, to do that. But he still runs it by this other man. He still goes through the proper protocol. He doesn't say, oh, I love you so much, we're going to break all the rules. This thing is bigger than the both of us. It's bigger than society. We just need to go for it and forget about this other guy. But he says, we're going to go about this the right way. And I think based on what 1 Corinthians 13, 4 and 5 say, that this is true love in a biblical sense. And someone's got that. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 and 5.
Love is patient, love is kind. Love does not envy, it is not boastful, it is not arrogant. It is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs.
Could you read that again? Sorry, I was...
Love is patient, love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs.
All right, yeah. So the phrase there is self-seeking, or as maybe a more traditional translation would say, does not insist on its own way, right? It was Boaz's intention to do something, but he wasn't going to circumvent any rules or cut corners to get there. And he wasn't just saying things when he says, I will redeem you, I will do for you all that you ask. This is kind. He describes her proposal as kind, right? He's obviously appreciative. He's not just saying things. He wanted to marry this woman. He says, you're a worthy woman, but he did not insist on doing it until the man who had the first right of refusal backed out. And throughout the story, we've been discussing this Old Testament concept where if a woman became a widow, her husband died, then her brother-in-law, if he was single, would marry her in order that they would have children to leave this man who had died a legacy. And Ruth and Boaz's story is similar to that idea. It's not a perfect example of it, though, because Ruth's husband was dead, right? But her brother-in-law was also dead. Mahlon died, and also Chilion died. So there's no brother-in-law. So now we've kind of gone out into the distant relatives. And at one point, it didn't seem like there would be any hope for Ruth to have children or leave a legacy or get, have a marriage longer than she did. But there is some hope that comes in the form of two distant relatives who are on the table. And so we're going to see how the story unfolds. It says in verse 1, Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend. Sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. So Naomi, remember, she told Ruth that Boaz was basically going to settle this matter today. And she wasn't wrong. I mean, he immediately basically goes up to the town gate and he's prepared to handle the business. So picture this gate as a place where people met. The way I think about it in my mind, because the way our society works, like everybody's in a car, and the way places we live, we don't have to go into town. We're already in town, really. So there's no gate for us to enter. But if you think about when you go to like Busch Gardens or something and you're meeting your friends there or whatever, okay, I'll meet you, and you give them a landmark. So this place was kind of like the landmark meeting spot, and it would have been a big brick structure or like some sort of large blocks. And so there would have been shade there, in a place where we know this region of the world gets pretty hot in the day, but then it also gets cold in the night. It's an interesting climate. And so there would have been shade there. There would have been places to sit. And if you wanted to catch somebody and you didn't know their schedule, it seems like Boaz knows this guy's got to come in and out of the city at some point. And it says he comes by. Yeah. Now, then, when he addresses the man, I'm willing to bet that Boaz knew this guy's name. Because after all, he knew enough about him to tell Ruth there was this relative. And he knew that he was next in line. But yet he says to him...
Wait, so did Naomi not know that there was a relative?
I don't know. I don't know. Not clear, I guess. So, I don't think it's Boaz that forgot his name and said, "Hey, pal," or "Hey, sport."
It is crazy. Messiah gets it. She knows what's up with Ruth. It's crazy.
Well, anyway, I don't think what's going on here is that Boaz has forgotten this guy's name, so he says, "Hey, friend," or, sometimes we'll do this. The Christian version is, "Hey, brother," when you don't know somebody's name. That's at least men. I don't know if women have that thing, but if you see somebody at church, you don't know their name. "Oh, hey, brother," right? So I don't think that's what's happening. I think Boaz knew the man's name, but it's the author who did not know or mention the man's name. And the story reads that Boaz pulled the man aside and called him, and in the Hebrew phrase is Poloni Almoni. And it means...
What did you just say?
The Hebrew phrase for friend.
Oh.
It's
okay.
2 words. And it could mean someone, such a one, or so-and-so. And my Hebrew dictionary says that this phrase is used with a sense of concealment. You're trying to hide something. It identifies a specific person or place without giving the name of the person or place itself.
Ooh.
What? So then we have to ask, well, why is this man's name intentionally left out of the story? And I think it goes back to the kinsman redeemer laws, which we've already read once or twice in these weeks in Ruth. But we're going to read it again. And it's Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10.
When brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family.
What?
Aww.
She just sent me this. Like,
Are
She
they
got a lot of
reunited?
hair.
see, that was Harper. But why is she in the little thing? To help her breathe?
That's the
Let me see.
NICU, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let me see.
Why That's usually what, like babies who.
Oh. Yeah, she's intubated. Oh. Thank you.
Why's she in there?
She's clearly not breathing the best, and she's in there to keep her warm. When babies get hypothermic, it's very bad. You know what? I don't understand.
What?
I just don't understand this stuff. I don't get, and what I mean is I don't understand what needs to happen. I got that. I can read and make sense of what needs to happen. I don't understand the reasoning.
For what?
Why can't the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family? Why not? And why isn't a daughter mentioned? Like, I do not understand the reasoning. I just don't get it. Like, I have so many big questions for God.
Why would you marry out of your tribe?
Why is it a problem if you do?
Why would it be an interest?
Okay, if you're just going to answer everything with another question, never mind, I'll keep reading. When brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family. Her brother-in-law, not outside the tribe, her brother-in-law, take her as his wife, have sexual relations with her, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man does not want to marry his sister-in-law, she is to go to the elders at the city gate and say, "My brother-in-law refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. He isn't willing to perform the duty of a brother-in-law for me." The elders of his city will summon him and speak with him. If he persists and says, "I don't want to marry her," then his sister-in-law will go up to him, and in the sight of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot and spit in his face. Sounds like a great idea. Then she will declare, "This is what is done to a man who will not build up his brother's house, and his family name in Israel will be the house of the man whose sandal was removed."
Right, so...
Tell me what purpose that serves.
I don't know. I'm not sitting here defending the purpose.
Does no one else
What purpose does it... Why does there need to be a purpose for it? I'm just telling you that that's what it was.
Never mind. It's okay.
So if the man who is eligible and obligated to marry his sister-in-law on behalf of his dead brother refused...
What happens if he was already married?
Then he's not obligated.
Then who does it?
Then there's no one. Or, in this story, some of the more distant relatives take up the task. If this person refused and he was eligible, he was no longer known by name in Israel, if you caught that. Instead, he'd be known as a man who had his sandal removed. Right, and so remember that for later. And this tells us something that God forgets. And let's read in Psalm 9:5 something about God forgets.
You have rebuked the nations and destroyed the wicked. You have blotted out their names forever and ever.
Yeah, God, it says, the Psalms say, and there's other places we could go for this, that God has blotted or will blot out the names of the wicked. So we can think about this guy's name being removed from the records of Israel, right? Him and his last name too, it's all gone, and now he's known as the man who had the sandal removed. And you'll find this kind of language of someone's name being forgotten or being whether it's being written in a book or being erased from a book or being blotted out, unless you think about like a whiteout, from a book all throughout the Bible. So Moses in Exodus 32 was basically begging God to forgive the Israelites. And he said, you can blot my name out of your book on behalf of them. And so that was one place. Or the Israelites, when they worshipped a golden calf in Deuteronomy 9, God set out to blot out their names from under heaven, he says. And then in Ezekiel 13, there were all these people claiming that God had sent them with a message. And Ezekiel came and said that the people who do that, their names shall not even be enrolled in the register of Israel. So it's like, we're going to forget these people, these names. And at the very end of the Bible, it says, if anyone takes away from the words of this book, this is Revelation 22, God will take away his share in the tree of life and in the holy city, which are described in this book. So it's obviously not a good name not a good thing for your name to be forgotten by God or among the people of God, whether it's in Israel or the church. And here, this man's name didn't even make it into the story. Elimelech was named, Mahlon and Chilion were named, Orpah was named, Ruth named, Naomi is named, Boaz. But this man will learn, was not willing to go through with his obligation. He's not named. So the names of the unrighteous, that is one thing God forgets, but there's something else he forgets, and we'll look about that later in the reading. In verse 2, it says, Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Now, the law, all throughout the Genesis through Deuteronomy, then sometimes you'll see it quoted in the New Testament, talks about what? Talks about confirming everything by 2 or 3 witnesses. So here Boaz brings 10. And so obviously he cares about doing things the right way. He's not trying to do this hush-hush under the table. He wants people to know what's going on here. But I also think the 10 witnesses point to something else, and we'll get to that later. Then he, in verses 3 and 4, explains to this other relative about the land. And he says, you can redeem it, and that's fine, you redeem it. But if not, tell me, and then I will. Well, when the man hears that there's an opportunity to acquire some land, he's all for it. Someone died and I'm in the will, right? Sure, I'll take it. I can expand my portfolio of properties. Sweet. He immediately agreed to redeem the land, but much like Orpah earlier in the story, this man was only willing to go part of the way. And then in 5 and 6, Boaz breaks the news. He tells the whole story. The day you buy the field from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I can't redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So yeah, Boaz lets the cat out of the bag. If you take the land, you also get the Moabite woman. And it's at this point that the relative backs out of the deal. Now, some people will say, well, maybe this guy had another wife, and he couldn't afford to come home to his wife and say, honey, I did a little something today. I went and bought a field, and I found a new wife. Well, had this guy been married, he would have never been considered a kinsman redeemer in the first place. Instead,
That makes sense.
this man tells us exactly why he can't redeem the land or marry Ruth. He says, I cannot do it because I might impair or lose my own inheritance. He's saying, you're asking me to marry this Moabite and have children that'll be recognized as another man's. You're asking me to sink my blood, my sweat, my tears, and my money into a piece of land that at the end of the day will belong to Ruth's kids. So he's laying all his cards on the table. He's loyal to himself, his stuff, and his money. He's really not the marrying type. He's more about the numbers and the analytics. And he's looked at this situation through a business lens. And if he goes ahead, he'll have to buy the field, which is an expense. He'll have to marry Ruth and have children, another expense. And apparently Naomi's still hanging around, and Ruth made the promise that they would always be together. So there's yet another expense. This man's added it all up, and the profit and loss statement is in the negative. This is not a good investment. He's going to lose money on this deal. And any profit he makes from the field,
Smart man.
any profit he makes from the field, and any joy he might get from being with Ruth, he thinks would be canceled out by the expense of having children, operating the field, and caring for this mother-in-law. Unless there's something to be gained, this man wants nothing to do with this scenario. And I think sometimes we are the same way. An opportunity to do something for someone else, and I'm the worst at this, comes up, and we think about all the stuff we have going in our life, the things I'm trying to accomplish. Will this allow me to still do what I want to do? Or we'll say, I can't do that, and the reason is there's nothing in it for us. And I think sometimes when we do agree to do things for other people, a lot of times we do them because we stand to get some sort of personal benefit. Now, we don't have marriage practices like they did in Boaz's day, where...
What are the next cards?
Oh, I gotcha.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I want... Someone want to pick 3. Can I just call y'all?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of waiting for something.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, or you can just take the cards out.
No, they're already found and labeled.
Who are you going to call? Wow.
Because you're teaching.
You want me to do it now?
Well, my phone's going to go dead. So I have to put on charger first. And I'm going to call you.
Alright. Sounds good. Bye.
Oh, that's new. Should I
Yeah.
leave it open or?
Shut it. So we don't have these kinds of marriage practices where, you're supposed to marry a relative or all that kind of thing. But you'll still hear the same excuse from men today talking about marriage. There are men, for example, who today are totally unwilling to marry or consider being with a woman just because she might already have kids. They'll say, I ain't taking care of nobody else's kids, right? Even if the two were very compatible people, there's some men that just have this attitude that ain't going to be me. Then there are some people who just have this idea about marriage as a whole. Well, I'll never get married because the last thing I want is someone else telling me what to do, where to go, and how to spend my money. Absolutely not. So they look at marriage as a bunch of cons and negatives and costs and losses, rather than, it seems, Boaz in this story sees it as an opportunity to give and serve and care. So in this case, Ruth, her next husband, who would end up being Boaz, would be able to give her offspring. And then what this means is that the inheritance of Elimelech and Mahlon could be passed down to someone. But this unnamed man, so-and-so, was not willing to go through with this, and he wasn't afraid to show it. It says, we get this commentary from the author, It was the custom in the former times of Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. That was the manner of attesting in Israel. And then the man draws off his sandal. So some of what we've been reading in this story and in the Old Testament and where you read the Bible was a law based in those days. And keep in mind, Israel was not a democracy. It was a theocracy. God was the ruler. So if something was a law, that meant he commanded it. Other things in this story and in other Old Testament stories were not laws. They were just customs.
I have a question.
What's up?
So the consequences in Deuteronomy 25 applies to him?
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
I would say so, yes.
But she's not his sister-in-law. So you're telling me that because he said no, he's no longer a part of Israel?
No, he's a part of it.
He's removed.
Just doesn't have his name. And he doesn't have the name in this story.
All right. This is so problematic.
Okay.
That is so mean.
Why?
What? I think no one wants to be put in that situation. You wouldn't want to be put in that situation. And yet, if you say no, you're no longer in the books of Israel? Like, isn't that harsh? Or am I crazy?
I mean, it's how it was.
Doesn't that make you really glad you don't live in this time?
No,
That means everything is out of your control. Every aspect of life is out of your control. If you're chilling in life and all of a sudden, oh, here, buy this land, and this girl.
What aspect of your life is in your control now?
Well, I don't know why you're answering every question with a question.
I'm trying to help you think. I'm trying to help you think.
I have thought a lot.
I don't have answers, but I can help you. These are the questions I'm asking.
I am allowed to go and get a job and make money for myself. These women were not allowed to do that.
You could say it was allowed, or you could say it was, they would never have thought that was a possibility.
Okay. All right.
Even though Ruth goes and works and makes money and gets food for herself. So Ruth did it.
This man, in my opinion, should have a choice of who he wants to marry. And just because he says no, he gets taken away out of the inheritance and lineage of Israel?
It's like you could say today, I should get to have a choice about how I want to do with my life. And if God tells me to do one thing and I decide to not do it, then I don't have an inheritance with God. You have to do what God says. See where I'm coming from there?
No, I don't see where you're coming from.
The attitude of, how come I don't get to have it my way and my choice?
That's not the attitude. This is a massive transaction. I don't blame him for saying no. I'm not saying he should have said no. I'm not saying he should have said yes. I just don't blame him.
Okay.
And yet he gets the consequences.
Okay. I mean,
that's crazy. And I don't understand how, like, the Redeemer is acting like he didn't know of Ruth and Elimelech. Like,
he might not have. He might have. What might have happened was
the consequences in Deuteronomy 25 talking about a closer relationship than they had.
Or it could have been that Naomi, I mean, since we're just speculating, could have been that when Naomi moved out and Elimelech died, this guy just said, oh, I'll just start working into that land too because nobody's claiming it. So then maybe Boaz is saying, hey, buy this in public so people know you've done it the right way. And he says, yeah, okay, I'll take the land. So, I mean, it could have happened several ways.
Deuteronomy 25.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm
so
saying
then I
that
would say
it,
that's could be
it
speculated.
informs the customs that are going on right now. That they've expanded.
So maybe he's not getting the consequences of Deuteronomy 25. You're just speculating he is.
What
Just
were
like
the
you're saying, I'm
consequences?
speculating.
I mean, other than his name being forgotten, which is true.
That's a big consequence back in that time for those people.
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously the people whoever wrote this, Samuel or whatever, didn't know the name of the guy, but he knew everyone else's name. So it's like, yeah, the man's name was forgotten.
That's rough. That's rough, in my opinion.
So some things are laws, some things are customs. So the author has to add here, it was a former practice in Israel. And
Former. Past tense. So maybe that was
he's referring to the exchange of a sandal as a transaction.
Yeah, so
like
maybe,
as a receipt. Deuteronomy 25 is talking about a sandal being removed as shame.
That reading Deuteronomy 25 makes me think if you don't marry this girl,
If you're
are
eligible
punished.
to do something and God's told you to do it and you refuse to do it, then yes, that applies. Yes. You're eligible to marry. God has set up.
Lord, thank you that I was born after the coming, the birth, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and not before that. Thank you so much.
So this is something that had become outdated, so it has to get explained to us. And this particular cultural practice was the exchange of the sandal. So rather than signing a contract, the author tells us that one man would give one of his shoes to signify that a transaction had been made. Now, there's a connection between, I think, to be made between this exchange of a sandal, to show you've bought land, and a promise that God gave to the nation of Israel several times, but one of the times was in Joshua 1:3.
Oh, maybe that's in the science. You have that, Kim?
Mm-mm. No.
I have given you every place where the sole of your foot treads, just as I promised Moses.
Yeah, so if you removed your sandal in a transaction, then it's like, okay, the sole of my foot is touching this place. It now belongs to me. So it kind of makes sense when someone would take off their sandal when acquiring new land. But this mention of a sandal coming off is under different circumstances. Now, it also reminds me of something that John the Baptist said in Luke 3:16. I guess Messiah's also got that.
John answered them all, I baptize you with water, but one who is more powerful than I am is coming. I am not worthy to untie the strap of his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire.
So, yes, John is saying I'm not worthy to untie.
That was John 3:16? No, that's
Luke 3:16.
John 3:16 is not that. Okay. I thought I was reading John.
So, yes, John is saying I'm not worthy to untie Jesus' sandals, which was a lowly job, but maybe he's also saying I'm certainly not in any place to strike a deal with Jesus and tie off his sandals to signify it. But to fully understand that removal of the sandal, I think you got to keep what was said in Deuteronomy 25 in mind, which is when the kinsman redeemer would refuse to marry the widow, his sandal would be removed. That was a way of shaming him. Then his name would be forgotten and replaced with the man whose sandal was removed. Well, in this case, no one took the sandal off of his feet. It grammatically says he removed it himself. So this deal was so bad in his mind that he took off the sandal right off and hands it over. And therefore, the fact that Boaz went through with the deal that made no sense to this guy shows that he was loving Ruth, or as the KJV would put it, he was showing charity to Ruth
Wait, who was showing charity to Ruth?
Boaz.
How?
He's going through with this deal that this man finds so preposterous that he voluntarily removes his sandal, which was a form of shame, in Deuteronomy 25. He's like, I got to get out of this deal, so I'm taking off my sandal. Boaz, the one who goes through with it, even though it was such a bad deal, that is loving. And then the KJV version would be that is charity.
Okay, I would interpret that as it could be loving, but it also could be to escape the consequences that this man's gonna get. Wouldn't you think?
In the past chapter, do you think Boaz had the consequences in his mind and trying to get out of the consequences when he was talking to Ruth, or he was more interested in marrying Ruth and giving providing for her?
I cannot honestly say that the Bible hints anywhere in this whole book, maybe it hints elsewhere in the Bible, that Boaz was really excited to marry Ruth. And I don't think you can make an argument that it says that, because it's not there.
I think you need to read
and then
it
you say that I'm speculating, but you're speculating. Like, do you see what you're doing? You're saying I'm speculating.
I'm speculating at some points because there's a language barrier and a time barrier that I don't completely get. But I don't think I have to speculate to say that Ruth was interested in marrying Boaz. I mean, the other way around. Boaz was interested in marrying Ruth.
Kim, I need some input. Do you think it is evident that Boaz was over the moon excited to marry Ruth? Like
nobody said over the moon excited to marry Ruth. I said he's being charitable to her, which is the KJV version of the word love.
Oh my.
So, which means that in older times, people considered love and charity very closely related because they were synonyms hundreds of years ago.
Well, let me tell you what. Do you want some woman marrying you because they feel bad for you?
Charity does not always come because someone feels bad for you.
All right. I don't... Now what? Why are you being like this?
Your parents have been charitable to you and loved you. Not because Savannah is just she needs a lot of prayer and help. She just it doesn't start that way.
Well, that's a
the love between a husband and wife.
Yeah.
Husbands and wives are charitable between each other.
Would you want
not
to
because
marry
they feel bad for each other.
Who you didn't know?
I mean, that's like arranged marriages they had back then.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
and if you said no to that, you get the consequences of getting taken out of the lineage of Israel?
But think about it, it's like blind dates. I mean, nowadays it would be like a blind date.
the whole purpose of all these ceremonial laws and stuff is not because they have some sort of secret, it's not because they indicate the way that things should be or the way blah, blah, blah. It's because what's in the Old Testament really happened, but it's type and shadow of Jesus. So the laws where someone was required to do something that sounds kind of crazy to us, and Ruth and Boaz obeys it, and this man does not. It's like this exists so that when Jesus shows up, we have something to compare it to and say, okay, wow, the whole history of the world is something that God has divinely weaved together.
Yeah, I get that.
So it's not like, you know, for all people of all times, brother-in-law and sister-in-laws need to get married, and if the brother-in-law is unwilling to do it, then he's forgotten. But it's like that whole thing.
I guess I would just be like really interested to hear God's reasoning behind that. I simply don't I can't even.
I just try to give you what I think the reasoning would be. But I mean,
what? If you think I'm an idiot, just say it, because I feel like you do.
Nah. Kim, you let her know.
No, I mean, I just think And like, 'cause I mean, if you think about all the couples in the Bible, like, I think we're trying to compare, like, how we feel, like, the head over the heels.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, like, but my thing is, I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking
No,
for...
I'm just saying, like, how we, like, want to go to 0 to 60, where back then, they went to, like, 0 to 2.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I'm not asking for a 0 to 60 in this situation. It's more of, like, I don't understand why God would... Like, this is a genuine... I do not understand why God would...
Make it so men were required to care for women? Like,
yeah.
Like, you as someone who struggled with this topic, you should look at this story and say, God is so interested that women be cared for, that if a man refuses to do it, his name is forgotten in Israel.
Right.
And you should say that then this is a society that cares for and protects women. That's one that God has designed. It shouldn't be, where's the man's choice? Where's the woman's choice? No choice. Because if these people had a choice, they would choose the wrong thing. They would choose to not get married, or they choose to sleep around, or they choose to just steal the land rather than doing it properly. So God says, here's the law. This is how it's done. It's done so that the land doesn't exchange hands too often, because it's a whole other rabbit hole we get to, but it's also done so women are protected, and so the nation lives on, that there's offspring. And in particular, this story, the offspring leads to Jesus. So it's doubly important that Ruth has children.
Because that's like carrying a last name.
Right.
Like, you want to have a son to keep that name alive.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
I just think you should be excited at this.
This is not exciting.
And say, wow, God cares that women are protected, provided for, married, fulfilled. You know?
Mm-hmm.
That he's willing to punish a man who refuses to do that. I mean, to me, that speaks volumes. I mean, you can disagree if you want, but I would just, now I have this as in my arsenal, as God has laws
All right.
that require
Didn't know you were building one.
women to be protected and cared for. And that if the men aren't willing to do it...
Oh, but in this story, Ruth had to throw herself at Boaz. Got it. Boaz didn't initiate squat.
He would have. You give him a couple of weeks.
Speculation.
Yep.
Exactly. So don't throw that at me.
Oh, and you're speculating that she threw herself at him.
She did!
You didn't hear the whole conversation between them two. He could have obviously been interested.
Noah!
He could have.
Well,
So
I'm telling you right now, if you woke up and there's a random woman who you've talked to 3 times at the foot of your bed and said,
Hey, can you, marry me tomorrow? I think that would be a little weird.
yeah, that's why it says Boaz was startled. There's a
And I
woman in his
don't
bed.
think you as a rational man would be like, yeah, let's ask this other guy in case he wants you first. But if not, sure. That's what happened.
If that was the noble thing to do in my culture, maybe. I've just been raised and
Then guess
conditioned
what?
differently.
You're a whole lot better human than I am. I most certainly want to do that.
Okay. All right. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead and his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So this story began with a lot of funerals. Elimelech died, Mahlon died, Chilion died. Now it's going to end with a wedding. Yeah. And the two things Ruth was missing, food and a family, they're coming back. So Boaz gladly announces in the front of all the witnesses that he had bought the field from Naomi, and he had also purchased Ruth. Now, if the language about buying another person bothers you,
Yes, it does.
just remember that this is language all through the New Testament about Jesus buying you. So
that's fine.
we
Jesus
can go
buy me.
1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20 is one of the verses out there. Nobody's got it? Nobody's got it? What do you got? 1 Corinthians
13, 4, and 5.
Man. Well,
Wait, but you had a card. Is it your
yeah,
card?
it's 1 Peter. Maybe I didn't write it.
Just like Jasmine and Aladdin, are you suggesting I'm for sale? That's a funny line. You guys remember that?
Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have
I
from
could go.
God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price.
Yeah, that's fine.
How about
But no man is purchasing me, respectfully. And that comes from a non-feminist view.
How about I'll read Acts 20:28, which says, pay careful that this is Paul talking to the Ephesian elders. Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to care for the church of God, which he bought, which he purchased with his own blood. God purchased the church of God, which with his own blood. Then you have to ask, when did God bleed? It's on the cross. Then how about even in 2 Peter 2, which is very similar to the book of Jude, which we studied. It talks about the false teachers who were infiltrating the church. It says they would deny the master who bought them. So there's a sense in which, and we'll get into that later. But just the idea of being bought, I don't want you to be offended or, we're talking about redeeming. That whole language of redeeming is like a transaction. Well, in the package deal, Boaz was able to claim Ruth as his own, as his wife. And notice how that detail about her being a Moabite doesn't get lost. She's a foreigner, but he still redeems her and claims her. He's not afraid of it. Also in the transaction, Boaz acquired some land.
So isn't that him marrying out of his tribe? So a guy can do that, but a girl can't.
No. She technically, while she was born a Moabite, it's like the wife of someone in his tribe. So, no.
So her first husband married outside.
Yes. Yes.
And a guy can do that, but a girl can't.
No, it was wrong. We talked about that week 1.
Sorry, I don't have a perfect memory like you.
Well, I'm just saying.
Sorry.
Now, I'm not able to read this portion about Boaz buying a field without immediately thinking of Jesus' parable about the purchase of a field in Matthew 13:44. You have that?
The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. Where a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. So basically he kind of just gave everything up to have a field.
Right. So some people will turn this, I think, backwards. They'll say, if you come across Christianity, you need to sell everything you have and go full on into it. I think it's the reverse, that Jesus is the guy who bought the field. That the point of the story in Ruth is that Boaz is risking his assets, the things he owns, to purchase the land and care for others and raise children in someone else's name. And in the parable, it's Jesus who purchases the field. He buys humanity with his blood, sweat, and tears. And in that field, the world, there are some who would believe and be saved. Now, this field that is in Bethlehem was owned by a man who was from Bethlehem, an Ephrathite, we're told. It just might have been the location where David tended the sheep as a boy. And it might have even been the place where Jesus was born in a manger. But notice the reason for Boaz's purchase of the field and buying the field and marrying Ruth. He says to perpetuate, or we'll say continue, or carry on the name of the dead in his inheritance. So Boaz's actions of redemption were done for the men who had died, just as much as they were for the people who were living. Ruth and Naomi and himself even. And I think we could tie this back to Jesus and say, well, most of the heroes of the faith we've heard about in the Bible happened before Jesus' lifetime. And then when Jesus dies and comes back to life, that work of redemption is not only good for the people who were living in his time or after his time, but also applies for something for the people who were dead already. And what Boaz is doing here, redeeming the field, marrying Ruth, and starting a family, is done for the people who had died before him. So, then in verse 11 and 12 it says, all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz has made his vow to marry Ruth, and the people basically pray that the family will be like Rachel's, Leah's, and Tamar's. Now, on its face, this sounds like a prayer that there would be many children to come out of this marriage. After all, Rachel and Leah, between the two of them, gave birth to 12, and then those boys were like the fathers of the 12 tribes. So, literally, this is, in one way of thinking, a prayer that many offspring would come from this.
They had 12 sons.
Correct.
So it was half a buffalo.
But there's something else here you can't afford to miss. This prayer that there would be like Rachel and Leah's house.
But weren't they married the same guy?
Right. So Rachel and Leah's family was not perfect.
Did they both
obviously.
remain married to him?
I'd have to reread the story. I should have. Their family was obviously not perfect. And in fact, the marriage to Jacob began in an awfully shady way. Remember, Laban lied to Jacob and tricked him into marrying Leah instead of Rachel in Genesis 29. And then Tamar, this is the woman who dressed as a prostitute in order to trick her father-in-law into sleeping with her so that she could have a child. So, in both of these families that are talked about at the end of Ruth, there are some serious sins going on. But no one in the town seems to remember them. And what's better is that God had forgotten them as well. So, yes, the name of Elimelech's other relative was forgotten, but so were the sins of Leah and Tamar. And so God forgets the names of the unrighteousness, but he forgets the sins of the faithful. And while speaking of that man who took off his shoe and gave it to Boaz, you need to know that when Jesus arrived and lived and died, basically took the sandals off our feet and stood in our shoes and swapped places with us, And speaking of that land that needed to be bought back, if you remember to the first sin that was committed and what was part of it that happened as the consequences was that Adam and Eve were removed from the Garden of Eden. They lost their land. They were thrown out. And someone needed to buy it back. Not just a physical plot of land, but a place where God and man could be together again. And the truth is that a sinful person, you and I, can't make that purchase. We don't have what it takes. We've inherited a sinful nature from our ancestors, Adam and Eve. And there are 10 witnesses, the 10 commandments, that prove we aren't able to restore on our own a severed relationship between God and man. So we needed someone else to stand in our shoes and make the purchase for us. And that's what Jesus did. He's the God-man who takes our place to bring God and man back together. And on top of that, you and I and everyone who believes, just like the children of Ruth and Boaz, would soon have and will receive an inheritance. And 1 Peter 3:1, I think. 1 Peter 1:3-5 talks about an inheritance that we have, not just money and talking about being in someone's will, but in a spiritual way. It says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time."